Hi, everyone. My name is Emily, and I'll be co-hosting today along with Giulia. And we have an awesome panel on linguistics and how it relates to conversational AI. Um, and it's just something that I've just heard so many times. Like, if you have a linguistics background, like it's a really good fit for conversational AI. And I just wanted to kind of learn more about linguistics in general. I think um, people may not know kind of what goes into it and how it relates. And so, yeah, we have an awesome panel. And let's just do a quick round of introductions, and then we'll get into the questions. Ashwini, do you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So I'm Ashwini Ganeshan, and I'm currently a conversation designer at Live Person. But before this, I worked a little bit on a team that worked on improving Alexa's speech. And then before that, I was a professor of linguistics. And I'm originally from India, so I grew up speaking multiple languages. And that's kind of how I was interested in, just understanding how languages work and how people communicate. I'm sure more things will come out when we talk, so I'll keep it at that.
Cool. Sarah?
I'm Sara. I'm a conversation designer in Italy, specifically in Indigo AI, a company that does virtual assistants, of course. And I have a background in linguistics. I studied linguistics in the university. I'm super passionate about it.
Awesome. Falene?
Hi, I'm Falene. I am the founder of Lingua Robotica, a company that I started in order to create robots. And I come from a background of academic linguistics, specifically computational linguistics. I am a PhD dropout, everything but the dissertation. So sad, but yay. And I got into conversational AI simply because they wanted a linguist and didn't know what it was. And we'll keep talking about that later.
And Jyoti?
Hi, everyone. It's so nice to meet you all. My name is Jyoti Iyer. I currently work in a company called Rosie AI. It's a company that does a suite of AI related things, and I do linguistics related things, but also a lot of stuff on the product side. And I'm sure we'll talk more in a moment. My linguistics background is I did a master's and then a PhD in linguistics, and totally relatable what Ashwini said. The growing up bilingual, I'm also from India, and I did my master's in India and then moved to the States for my PhD. And I'm currently based out of Canada. And yeah, just excited to have this conversation with you all.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for being here. So I guess the first thing I'm curious about is like, what is linguistics? Like, how do you define it? And what do you study when you go into linguistics? It's a very loaded question, but I just love to learn more.
So I think the professor can answer it best, but I'm going to jump into it because I've done a lot, and you can correct me, Ashwini. Linguistics is a study of human language processing, structure, thought, and inside of that structure, you have a bunch of different things. So I specifically studied Indigenous languages of Canada and documentation and revitalization. So we went through and we looked at the very small details of phonetics and phonology. So the sounds, how the sounds are made, how they go together. But you also have bigger things such as morphemes, which are the parts of words that go together. Syntax, which is how those words come together. Words is very important. Even languages is a very important one with the quotes. And then you have sociolinguistics, which comes down to how people communicate. What is the purpose of communication? You have it so that people can track conversational linguistics, so they kind of see how conversations happen back and forth. And it's a very broad topic. And then when you get into what I studied, computational, you get more things like statistical analyses of parts of speech in language. And so it's very big and very broad. And that's my definition of it. Ashwini, fix my definition.
Yeah. No, I will chime in. I mean, yes, I think it's hard to tell someone you have the wrong definition of linguistics if you're a linguist. But first of all, I think one of the things when I was thinking about this question was, for anyone that doesn't know what linguistics is, first of all, I want you to think about when someone says biology, right? That's a very broad field. You have microbiology, you have, I don't know, other types of biology, but the point is linguistics is the same way. So when you say, if someone says, I studied linguistics, that's very broad. So there are very much smaller fields in linguistics, but the overall goal of linguistics is, I would say, twofold. One is to understand, like Falene said, what what is language, how is it structured, how is it formed. You can study it historically, you can study it at a certain point in time, you can study it for a community, you can study it across communities, you can study how do you mix two languages, right? So looking at the language itself, but the other is to look, so how's the language formed, right? But you can also look at how do people use the language. So it is, you can either study, it's a little bit hard to separate both, but the point is sometimes you're studying the language, sometimes you're studying how do humans use the language. And it's honestly a little bit of mix of both. I mean, if you're interested, I'm sure any of us could elaborate, but I'll let other people jump in. Don't know. Also, Emily and Julie, if something's not making sense, it would be really helpful for you to ask for clarification.
Absolutely. Sounds good. Okay. Does anyone else want to jump in? Jyoti?
Yeah, sure. I would go. So I was thinking about this too, and I really love these answers. And listening to other people talk about how they see linguistics really highlight sort of our own internal biases. And there were some things I noticed that I probably wouldn't have remembered to include. So it's nice to get a spread. I think for me, the kind of three big bins are, um, basically, like, I think linguistics is anything that studies how language works. Like Ashwini said, either you can study it, like how do we use it, or how do we acquire it as children, or there are many ways to look at it. How does it work in the community, like social linguistics? But basically, I think you can distinguish different types of linguistics by what sort of data you look at. And so you've got the statistical kind of methods on one side, and at the sort of more AI, and you've got large language models and all of those related things. So that to me is actually, in a way, the language part is a little bit incidental sometimes. Even it's machine learning. I don't know if that's like I don't mean it to be like a weird thing to say. I think that's like one of the strengths of that approach. But that's not where I come from too, so I might be like misspeaking as well. And sort of on the other end, which is the end that my background is in, there's theoretical linguistics, of like, so like my background is in semantics and pragmatics. You often have, like, the kind of data you look at is like very structured interviews with usually a very small number of people. As the researcher, you might be one of those people, and you are giving grammaticality judgments. And then somewhere in the middle is the behavioral kind of linguistics, where you're running experiments, where you're not asking people, hey, do you think this sentence is kind of, does it sound weird or does it sound fine? But rather you're giving them situations in which you can observe their language use. And I think we have a good spread of skills across those bins.
So I just want to jump in with one final thing that none of us said, but I think we're all thinking. Just because you speak another language does not mean you're a linguist. Studying a language for communication does not make you a linguist. It makes you like language. It makes you have multiple languages. And as a linguist, you will learn extra. I think I learned 4 languages during my studies. But it does not mean that you're a linguist. It's incidental, as Jyoti said.
Yes, I totally agree with you all. And I was about to say in exact this thing. The fact that fascinates me about linguistics is that language is something that we use on a daily basis, but we not just use it. It's fundamentally a part of us. It allows us to communicate with the others, but only few people know how it really works, why everything we said can be understood. And I think the magic of linguistics is try to give an answer to these questions. And that's what I really love about it.
I love this way you pictured it. It's beautiful, honestly. And in bringing this more down to earth, unfortunately, to the realm of conversational AI and to draw strings to like how we build connections from linguistics to conversational AI, is it true that like different types of linguistics relate to conversational AI in different way? Like maybe like some are more related to technical aspects, some to design aspects. I would love your inputs on what relates to what and try to help us make some order in this configuration.
So I can jump in because I am a developer. I got into this kind of by accident because of my computational linguistics background, because I already knew R because of statistical programming. But I think that it really depends on what you do. Back when TTS and you had to manipulate every single sound was much bigger, you needed phonologists. You needed people who understand how sounds go together, because the very structure of an artificial language, or the artificial voice specifically, is that it takes diphones or phonemes, so two sounds or one sound, and puts them together, which means that, and this is my classic example, you might say happier aging, but because of how everything is parsed, it sounds like happier raging. And so then as a linguist, you have to go in and you have to say, okay, I'm going to remove this sound and this sound and this sound and this sound. And one of the issues we always found with AWS Poly was sometimes you can't manipulate the sounds as well as your linguistic background lets you. And so that's very much for that. And I think that that's a little bit more of the technical deep dive stuff. But for anyone who's working on the more socio linguistics, the more conversational aspect, I'd love to hear your part, because that's also very important in how you drive a conversation.
Sarah?
Are we all technical?
No, I think we've got. Do you want to? Does anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I took some notes because I had to think about this. But I think exactly it depends on I think it really depends on, as Falene said, where are you in this conversational AI space, right? What is your role? So I'm a conversation designer. And Falene talked about she being a developer. So really my focus when I'm a conversation designer is more on the side of I guess the pragmatics is what I would call it in general, the pragmatic side, which is what does someone mean by what they say? Well, actually, pragmatics includes a lot of things, but one of the things is what does someone mean by what they say? So, as a conversation designer, when I am designing a bot, I want my bot to be clear when it asks the customer a question or tells them what action to take next. I don't want to be vague. So I want to make sure that I'm asking the questions in the best possible way for a human to interpret them without ambiguity, right? On the other hand, when I would love to kind of prime the customer to also respond in a way that the bot is able to understand them, that is a lot harder to control, but you can control it a little bit with conversation design. But same thing. So when the customer responds, I'm really thinking about what is their actual intent here? What do they really want here, right? But the other thing is also things like politeness are part of pragmatics. So when you have an interaction between a bot and a human, I think a lot about what is the level of politeness we need to maintain. How do we save face? So how do we make sure that even if the customer has made a mistake, we're not trying to draw attention to it and kind of tell them, that was bad, you did not answer my question, right? But let's move the conversation along. So there's also a lot of things that I think about in terms of negotiation, linguistic negotiation. So again, that depends on where you are in conversational AI that you think about different things. I think other people might speak to other aspects, so I will pause here.
Okay, thank you. I think Falene spoke about phonetics in computational linguistics, in conversation design. And we talk about the pragmatic aspect. We can talk about also the language linguistic, about corpus linguistic. So how to create a collection of data to train the AI system in a way that can usefully understand what the people said. But the concept of a balanced corpus is really important in linguistics because it allows us to understand everything, more or less, of what people said. And it allows us, if a corpus is not balanced, you have the risk to do not fulfill to understand what the people said. So I think also the aspect of the corpus linguistics can be add to this kind of information a conversation designer should have.
I guess I'll pop in. Honestly, like I think the stuff that I have experienced most myself is the pragmatics and the corpus stuff. It's like, and I wonder really if any particular flavor of linguistic background helps or doesn't help. I think in general a linguistic background helps a lot, and I think paradoxically, I think a certain for me at least, like because a lot of my work is in the customer service kind of domain in various industries, but basically interacting with end customers. I think a healthy curiosity and ability to observe what is really terrible about experiences you might have encountered, and like try to understand how those sorts of how errors might happen and how you might go about avoiding those errors, like that can help a lot. And so like it maybe like any linguistics background would help, but I think the thing that is a good partner to that is really observing a lot about user experiences around you.
And if I can just chime in, I think I'd want to make sure that because I don't think any of us represents this group, but there are a lot of people that annotate, and so annotation is a really important part of conversational AI. Without good annotation, we wouldn't have strong models, right? We wouldn't be able to understand the customers or even put together coherent sentences if we're thinking about Gen AI, for example, right? So we don't represent these people, but they exist too, and they are like tagging parts of speech, things like minute details, and that's really important too. And then I think in general, one thing that linguists bring to the field is a linguistic empathy. We are very aware that most people don't speak like me, and that is okay. We want to meet the customer where they are at. We are most linguists I have met are very non-judgmental about language use. And that is something I face as a challenge when I talk to clients. I think people who are not linguists, when you think about, people wanting to correct the your with the apostrophe and without it and things like that, right? It's like language changes, language evolves. Linguists bring that perspective of let's see how the customer uses language and respect that and acknowledge that and accommodate for that diversity.
And just quickly jumping off of that with the annotators, because I fully support that and believe it 100%. Most of us in linguistics who have done more than just a bachelor's, which is a lot of us because you get hooked early on and it drags you through, and then eventually you realize, oh no, I'm in linguistics. Most of us have actually done that. I don't know about all of you, but in my master's, it was basically that, sound files and annotation. And having that as a background, understanding that that's what goes into a language system or an NLP system or into an LLM, just that basis understanding is not often something you find, because a lot of people look at it as a black box, whereas as an annotator yourself, at some point, you know that it isn't, and you know how to do it, and so you know maybe what to reach for and what to ping for.
Maybe just to clarify, like what more or less is involved in annotating and just so we're all on the same page of what kind of activities that involves. And yeah.
So this is a good question because, again, Ashwini is right. I don't think any of us currently do that with conversational AI. But if you go back to when we were doing it, it involves strings of data. If you had it written down, you had to go piece by piece, sometimes correcting grammar or correcting issues, so you have a good standard. And it means removing parts that are nonsense, that don't make sense to the system. And if you're listening to a sound, it means cutting up the important parts and annotating them. There's a system called Pratt. I don't know if any of you worked with it, probably yes.
Oh, yeah.
You got really familiar with cutting and you saw the sound files. And so you were able to tell where the very specific sounds would be, like a t, the of the t. You'd know where that is and you'd have to mark it down. And so you get down to the nitty gritty and then you'd have to pull back and say, okay, well, that is part of this smallish part of speech, which is part of this one word. And so you go all the way back and then all the way back in, and you write down, and it takes hours to do 2 minutes.
So I know we just talked about a lot of transferable skills and stuff. Is there anything else transferable from linguistics that you use on a daily basis or on a regular basis in conversation design or developing?
Yeah, I can go. So something that I really wanted to bring up with, especially this crowd, and considering that we're all conversation designers of some stripe or the other, is whether you're working in deterministic, flow-based, intent-based bots, or you're working with straight LLMs. I really find that there's still a lot of like there's an important role played by scripting. Just what does your ideal conversation look like? And I found it particularly useful in client facing conversations, just to give people examples, like, here's what we're building, and does this align with what you want us to build? And yeah, I think just the ability to kind of break down a conversation into its constituent turns. What does the bot do? What does the ideal putative user do? And script that out. I think that's really important. And I think something that's coming out of this discussion is also that one of the things I like about linguistics as a field is that it doesn't really gatekeep who gets to be a linguist. And so there's especially in industry, you can be any kind of linguist. And like when it comes to things like annotation, I really am very glad that you brought it up, Ashwini, because so much of the technological advances have been built on the basis of annotators who may not be called linguists, strictly speaking, but definitely are, in the sense that like they're helping us build these models and stuff. So I mean, so that's why I think like there are people who come from, I don't know, I've heard of people coming in from like drama, theater, script writing of other kinds. I don't know anyone personally, but I've heard rumors. But I think you could sort of get into conversation design from a variety of ways, just if you've worked with a language.
So I want to jump on that because I think that is fascinating. And I actually do know a couple of people from film that entered in. And I think that the difference that you'll find between a linguist and somebody who entered through drama or scriptwriting or even filmography is that as a linguist, you're looking at it a little bit more scientifically. As it's not just this, then this, then this. It's this, therefore 20 other things. And now we're picking this to go forward. And I think that when it comes to conversation design or even development, where that pops in is you can feel, or not feel, certain flows are going to have more of a chance of failure, because pragmatics will say, if you give them this option, they're not going to pick that. They're going to pick this because of the context and everything out. Now, I do think that you can learn that. Of course, we all did. But I do think that it is something that we bring from the get-go, that A doesn't always mean B. And in fact, if we consider the extra context, which as a developer, one of the things I've done is actually build that into the system to be aware of the different states that exist outside of the conversation that will impact the conversation. And some things that you might not consider, such as where someone's eye is looking.
Sarah,
Yes.
did you?
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Yes, I think, yes, there are also technical skills that a linguist can have, but also I think soft skill, like I think linguists are more or less obsessed by details because we study a lot of details. We do annotation. We study languages that only few people speaks because we want to know how they can speak it, even if they are few people, you know. And so we are really obsessed by precision and attention to the details. And also we do a lot of experiments. We study a lot of experiments, so we have a strong, I think, analytical thinking, and we have an empirical approach. If something doesn't work, we try to explain why and give a more scientific as possible explanation of that, I think. And an ability I found we linguists have is the ability to explain what is happening, because maybe engineer or a technical person have some difficulties to explain why something doesn't work to a sales, for example. We are in the middle and we can give explanations that are more accessible to clients, and we can translate the language of technical people into clients' language, and vice versa. We can explain the needed of clients in with the technical people. I think more or less all conversation designer have to have this ability, but I think for us maybe it's easier because we are used to technology, but we are used also to language, and we love language and how people interact with each other.
Ashwini, did you have something?
I just wanted to say that I think my linguistics knowledge helps me when I think of the transferable skills. While I don't apply my phonetics phonology language day in, day out, which also is not my strength. So, but it helps me talk to people that are working on that. So when I talk to the developers, right? So I think that's one way I use my skills, which is I'm able to connect to different people working on different things because I understand some part of it, right? And so I can approach them and meet them halfway. So that's one of the ways the content knowledge of linguistics is a transferable skill. And then I have to say, like, I agree with Sarah about the soft skills are really important. We're really taught a lot of critical thinking skills when you study linguistics. And that is, I mean, it's not just important in conversational AI. I think that's important in your whole life, in your world, in any role. So there are a lot of other skills like that, analytical skills that are really important as well that we learn, and how to like take a problem, break it up into smaller bits, and step by step work through it. That's not necessarily just for conversational AI. It is useful in many other roles as well. But one thing I want to disagree with, Sarah, because, let's spice it up a little, is I don't think I have definitely met linguists who are not able to distill those complex concepts into simple language. So I think the ones on this call, maybe we have that skill, but I wouldn't say all linguists have that. I think that is something you have to develop. And if you're a linguist that is struggling with it, I feel that my colleagues who come from theater and UX research have really helped me hone that skill a lot more. So yeah, that's all I wanted to add.
Yeah. We are talking about our personal experience. Maybe it's not always the same. I can agree with you.
And since we've talked about so many skills that you've been able to bring into conversational AI, I was wondering if there's also maybe some additional skills that you had to learn to sort of make the most out of being in the field of conversational AI, that you wouldn't necessarily get from linguistics. And maybe also, how did you go about learning them in case someone is also trying to approach this field from a linguistics background?
I can speak to two things, so I'll just say them quickly. I think the first one is to acknowledge that not everyone is as fascinated by all the linguistic details that I am. So, finding that balance between, not boring my audience about things I find fascinating and really catering to them for what is the right level of information detail that they need. And then the business aspect was something I had to learn about what is business value. That was completely new to me. And that was really, it felt like, wow, I wouldn't say it was a struggle to learn it because I had some really great teachers, but it was definitely something that I had not considered before. And it is something I've had to learn.
Does anyone else want to jump in? Oh, I think Falene might have frozen. Jyoti or Sarah?
I had to learn
I was actually thinking about something that maybe is a little bit specific to if you have a higher ed degree, like a PhD. One thing that I'm still learning is that there's a lot less of a burden to cite and footnote everything. You don't have to. And this is it's just one of those things where I think if your training is especially in linguistics, like for every single decision of every single word used, you have a reason. You don't have to actually share the reason every time. And so it is a bit of a learning process to understand that because of your training as a linguist, you have developed certain instincts and expectations about how users will speak and how the bot should talk and things like that. So learning to trust that is a bit of a process. And also, I definitely agree. Business value is. I'm still trying to understand that in different contexts, like how to say what the business value is. As I mean, it's not always opposed to making the end user experience very good. Often it's completely aligned, but like the places where those things kind of separate a little bit, I think tend to be a bit more challenging.
For me, it was an opposite, more or less experience, because in my company, they didn't know about the conversation. My first company where I started working the first time didn't know about conversation design. They made a virtual assistant, and they still do it, but they didn't know this field of study. So for me, the business aspects were really important to prove the value of conversation design. So, and I started to try to find KPI to show that the bot with structure that I made in a conversation design, studying really well the design and stuff, were more performing than other kind of bot that were made before in a more static way, I can say, without design thinking, I can say. So this is my personal experience, actually. And yeah, and about what I would like to be more spread, how about like a knowledge. I'll be banal, but I think this is the key of conversation design are Grice principle. I think if something doesn't work, you can find an explanation inside the maxims of the Grice principle. I don't want to bother you about it, but if someone has question, we can talk about it.
So I'm going to jump in because I actually hate Grice's maxims when it comes to conversation design, because I think that they're only relatively relevant. And I think that we put so much emphasis on it. So if we want to go into that, I will fight you. But I think that one of the things that really helped me, or I needed to learn that was not transferable, was learning Python. I think that this sounds really dumb, but going in with a scripting language and learning how to use it will elevate your position, because you have the data abilities, you have the understanding of how you should be searching through data, but having that specific language under your belt will really help. Now, I skipped that and I went to Java, but still, Python is the way to.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this is all great, and I think a lot of it is relatable to other fields as well. So we do have an audience question, and it's about how does generative AI change linguistic considerations in conversation design? And I do have a follow-up question to that, but let's start with that one first. Ashwini, do you want to start?
Sure, yeah. So I've worked on some projects, Gen AI projects, and I think first of all, it depends on where you're approaching the Gen AI, right? So what your role is. So you like, where are you involved in the process? Like, is someone handing you an LLM and saying, here it is, use it? Or are you actually involved in setting up the LLM? So there's a couple of different things there. How about I speak to you're handed something. So when you think about most LLMs, it's all about how do you do the prompt design, right? So what you're doing is you're trying to talk to this machine to get the best outcome possible in a consistent way. So it is really, on the one hand, so what I think the strength for linguists is that you can think about multiple different ways to ask the bot to do something. That's just part of our linguistic training, that we know that you can ask something in multiple different ways and we can test it. And then that's the other strength that we have. We have done these type of experiments or this type of research before, where we are able to break down a problem, say this is step one, this is step two. We document things very well. Most linguists are really good at documentation. So that gives us also this advantage of, okay, let's test this way. What is the result? Let's document it. Let's test another way. So we're able to, I think linguists have that strength of how do we get the LLM to reach consistently, right? Because again, consistency is an issue with LLMs, right? So I think that linguists are very valuable to right now. But I also want to say that I don't think you need necessarily a linguist to do it. There are people that have these intuitions. There are people that have this curiosity. If you're a linguist, you kind of seem to have like an edge, an advantage, but it doesn't mean other people can't learn, prompt design, for example. I was thinking about, yeah, I actually approach it as negotiating, but again, because of my linguistics background and everything, I feel like I'm negotiating with this AI, and so I am using my best language skills, and being aware of my language skills helps me negotiate better with this LLM to get the result I want.
So I'm going to jump in because I think that this is really interesting. And if you're going to Unparsed, this is a plug, I'll be there talking about something similar. Some people find it difficult to communicate with out-of-the-box LLMs because the response they give isn't necessarily what you're asking for. And if you do what a lot of companies do, which is say, hey, we're just going to get a developer, an engineer to fine-tune that, what you'll find is that they're very linear. And I don't know if any of you have played around. you can kind of feel the difference between a chat using LLM that is with an engineer versus a chat with a conversation designer. And I think that this speaks differently, or doesn't speak directly to why you need a linguist, but it does speak to why you would want somebody who could handle all of the things that we're talking about, the pragmatics, the flow, and the understanding. And I think Gen AI is changing our understandings of what can be produced. But I think that it's also important to note, and this is going back, way back to annotators, and also building corpuses. If you're making your own small language model, you're going to want to include relevant data. When you start including non-relevant data, you start getting issues. Specifically, you can get it to say things that are culturally acceptable outside of your community, but in your community are not okay. We see this back in even Meta released 2 AI chatbots. I don't know if you noticed in 2022 and 2023. They removed them within days because they were misogynistic and anti-Semitic. I think one was removed within like 5 hours. And that is because the corpus that fills the LLM, the language model, had data points that they did not want. And as someone who is a linguist, you go through so much data throughout your entire career. You look at pages and pages and sheets of data, and you're able to go, that's a problem, and that's a problem. And I think that this is where linguists thrive, in like data scientists, but specific to human communication.
I think I can add to that. I think that when we talk about this consistency, getting LLMs to do what we want them to do, it's very, very important to always keep guardrails in mind. I mean, the meta examples really highlight that guardrails have to be part of the architecture. This is not optional, and most companies understand that at this point and are successful to varying degrees in implementing guardrails. But yeah, like, so one thing that I've learned from my colleagues at Rosie is the importance of there's guardrails on the one hand, but also combining that with a standard and robust suite of, like, basically a testing suite. What are the situations that you must always test? And they can be, some of them are definitely about avoiding offensive language, but some of them are also like kind of functional stuff, like every single experience we produce needs to be able to handle the basics. Like if a user asks for a live agent in whatever 50 different ways, we can actually transfer to a live agent, that sort of thing. So are those inputs recognized, and do we make sure that we test for those things every single time? And I think an important technical skill that comes from a linguistics training is sort of like, I don't know how to describe it other than completeness. It's like if you are making, say, you studied language X, you made some hypothesis, and you evaluated that in the context of language X. You always have to consider the implications that your hypothesis has on the larger field. Like, is your theory that you're building sensible and consistent with other theories that exist? Did you make up an explanation that handles, I don't know, verb stranding ellipsis, but you can't handle the dog bark, which is a story I've heard from other linguists, like how to test that your theory actually works. So I think making sure that you try to, and I mean, it's never going to be really complete, right? But trying your best to get a reasonable kind of spread of situations that one should test, I think, is really important.
Sara, anything to add?
Yes, I agree. with what you said. I think from a conversation designer perspective, a concrete aspect is that you will use with generative AI less NLP, natural language understanding. In my personal experience, at least, you will start to do more prompt rather than creation of corpora at the moment. So our work will change, and maybe our competence in the creation of balanced corpora in the small company that does a virtual assistant will be less relevant, rather than it will be maybe more relevant in bigger company that creates LLM actually. So this is a switch of a change, I think, maybe big. And I think the biggest challenge now is to fight about the generation of fake information, rather than also misogyny and violence information, but more the most, I think, the most relevant aspect is the fact that LLM can generate sentences that seems real, but they are not actually. So I think this is the pain point and the aspect we have to focus the most as conversation designer for the company. But in general, I think the researchers should study a lot about this, because I think they can be risky for this information aspect and for the society in general.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm curious if you foresee generative AI potentially impacting linguistic diversity and evolution. So a lot of the stuff that's coming out is like very generic, and so I'm just curious on your thoughts on that.
I do have a lot of thoughts on this. So, among other things, I specifically spent my years in academia with language documentation and revitalization of underdocumented and under-speaker-fied populated languages, which means that sometimes the language would have two speakers. Now, this is a problematic thing because this language will die. The kids will not be able to speak it. How do you transfer that? And the benefit of generative AI for such a thing is that I can spend 20 hours with speakers coming up with many, many sentences. And I can say, this is a Sinaboy Nakota. Nakota is a Siouan language related to Lakota and Dakota. And I know that these are the similarities. And so then I can put that into a system and I can generate new, unique phrases. Now, it may not be the language that existed before, but it will be a language close enough that a community can build and work with it. I speak Hebrew, and that's kind of what we did before generative AI happened. We took the data points, we said, this is the type of language it is, this is what we know about it, these are close enough things, let's build it together. And so I think that this is amazing for the future of dying and endangered languages, if people put the effort into it. But when it comes to English, where most of the generative AI stuff is in, yes, there is a dominance of one language. And we have seen issues with it, issues with translations, issues with it becoming the main language. But that's globalization, and it was happening beforehand. Even before English, German used to be the globalized language. The language of business, specifically, is what we called it. So I think that it will impact. I see that it is impacting, but I don't necessarily think that that's anything different than what would have naturally happened.
I have a different. I'm speaking about Fanta linguistics. There's nothing scientific in what I'm going to say, but I imagine a future where we develop such strong technology that people became monolingual again, and we use only automated translator to speak with other people. So we can focus again on small local dialects. And maybe we can start again to speak more local language rather than the more widespread language. Actually, this is a way to see the future that is not scientific, but only like a possible scenario.
It's the universal translator from Star Trek, or the Babelfish, exactly.
Yeah.
Ashwini, did you have?
I think I have more questions than answers. So, yeah, I think, yeah, as Falene pointed out, like Latin used to be lingua franca, and then, it died. Like it's a dead language. So I'm not sure where this is going. It's hard for me to say. Like, I also somewhere have hope because I do believe in human beings, and I believe that people um, like forming communities and forming identities. And so I cannot imagine a world where we only have one language. I think I do. My worry is that businesses, when we have a very capitalistic society and we're just focusing on, profit, then yes, we are headed that way towards monolingualism. But we do have countercultures. They are not dead. They are well and alive, and I have hope in them, and I believe in them, and I think we can move towards diversity. Even if you think about fashion, for example, it's the same issue. We've had a lot of diversity in fashion, and now that's coming together because of globalization. People are tending to wear more similar things. But even in that similarity, some people want to break out and say, "This is my identity. I want to show that I have a perspective. I'm different." So why is that different for language? But I don't have answers. I'm not able to predict. I'm just curious to see where this takes us. I will say I am completely against being monolingual, in case that's not clear. And I am completely against the fact that our industry is so heavily focused on English first all the time. But I'm giving a talk on translation. That's actually one of the reasons about that. So, that's my stance. But do I have answers? I don't. So, yeah.
So I want to jump in on that one because I think that you made an interesting point, but I think that you made it without making it because you are multilingual. You come from a place that is multilingual with a lot of sub-dialects for regions. But if you look at people who are, listen, I'm going to just make it American-centric. Americans speak multiple languages. There's many languages, but there's one language in America. And so you have people who speak Spanish and Chinese and Mandarin and all these, but it's mostly one language. And that's what all the documentation is in. And so if you look at places like that, where there's one official language, or I don't think the US even has an official language, it just has a supposed language. The idea of a single language, just that idea makes a lot of sense. Even in Canada, Jyoti's there right now, there's a very strong split. English Canada speaks English and has French. French Canada speaks French and has English. And so I think that that is a point that is an interesting perspective. You come from a place where those dialects and those languages matter, and a lot of the English-speaking world, they don't matter. It's just you speak English or you speak English weird.
I mean, just on that note, right? I think what is really important is to be intentional about what we do. I would say, like, largely what we do to keep our linguistic backgrounds alive and to kind of resist against the global and capitalistic tendency towards English monolingualism. A lot of that might end up being stuff we do on our own time, which is not great. I would love for it to be possible for these things to align with our professional lives as well, but that might not happen. And I mean, like, as far as, like, I want to just make this a bit spicy. As far as the, like, I don't think anyone actually is monolingual. It just, depending on what you consider, how you define it, like, everybody has different registers. And so Americans, undoubtedly, who are, strictly speaking, monolingual English speakers, I'm sure will relate to just, even like speaking corporate speak, for example. How do you talk to your friends versus how do you talk to your boss? So I mean, like, and I will die on this hill. Like, I think bilingualism, as linguists use the word, which is to mean like multilingualism, really is the default state. And if there's one thing that I'd like to do as a linguist in whatever industry I'm in, it's to kind of communicate that strongly to people I work with.
So I want to add, this is why the quotation marks around language, because what is a language is still debated. It's not a full, strong thing. Any linguist in a room can come up with a different definition, and then any other linguist can argue, well, what about this language that you didn't know about until right now I told you about it? So Jyoti makes a really great point. But even then, language, right?
So I know this is like a fascinating discussion. I really want to continue. I know we're at time. So I think we'll just finish up with one last question. But maybe we can do a part 2 because there's so many more questions that I have. But I think if everyone can answer, what advice would you give to aspiring linguists or to linguists looking to enter the field of conversational AI?
Okay, so I have given this advice and I will continue to give this advice. You have all of the skills. You have all of it. You have the technical, you have the social, you have all of them. The trick is to figure out what matters for the job. So when you go and look at a job and it says X, Y, and Z, look back to the coursework that you did, look back to the side projects, look back to the fact that you sat in a hallway and went to make that one sound 20,000 times until you got it perfect. Because all of that matters to the job. You just have to figure out what matches the requirements, and once you're there, boom, you'll fly.
Anyone else?
I think something somebody told me when I was job searching and trying to figure out this transition from academia to industry was really define what it is you want to do. And this is very difficult. I would say, like, budget like several months for that, like maybe 6 months, to understand what you want to do. And I totally agree with what Falene said. You definitely have the skills, but like for me, for example, Falene, you mentioned like Python. I found that, like, because I don't have a background in Python, it gave me a lot of anxiety to think about the jobs that required it and stuff. So it really helped me to look for jobs that didn't require it. And it took a while talking to a lot of people to realize that there were jobs where that wouldn't be necessary. And then I was able to kind of tailor my LinkedIn, my resume, all of that, like in a little more focused way. And so it might seem very natural, and I've told this to people in this position in informational interviews as well. It might seem very natural to apply super widely to all sorts of different jobs, and maybe you should do that in the beginning. But the more you kind of narrow down and just take a chance, try it out. If it doesn't work, you can always try another industry in the next iteration of job searches. But try to figure out what is the focus you want to have, and that will help you on the job market.
Yeah, I totally agree. If you are Italian speaker, I wrote an article in my LinkedIn profile to explain my process of finding a job in AI with a background in linguistics, so you can read it. But the main concept, I think, are the one you already said. So you can do it, you have the skill. If you do not have the skill, you can learn them. And so don't be afraid of technology, because I think annotation may be more more scaring than studying a little bit of Python and create bots. And be brave, try, mess up, and build again. I think these are my suggestions.
Yeah, I agree with everything everyone has said. All the advice out there for any job seekers apply to linguists. Like, do networking, do informational interviews, think about your resume, work hard on it, get feedback on it. For me, the linguists I have spoken to tend to be academics, and I think their biggest challenge is the mental block about I am not going to be doing linguistics anymore if I'm not a professor, if I'm not in academia. And so that mental block is what you need to step out of, because, as everyone said, you have the skills, you have everything needed, and you will have a really satisfying career outside of academia. I promise you, even if you have a job that is linguistics adjacent. But really, it's your mental block. How do you get over that? Talk to people that are not professors, talk to people that are linguists in industry. Open your mind, challenge yourself. And that is my biggest advice. I feel like most linguists I've spoken to, it's the mental block that they need to get over first.
And sorry, I'll add only one thing. You do not have to have a PhD to do linguistics in a company. I do not have a PhD, and I work as a linguist in a company. So also, I think this is an important point. Maybe some people in linguistics said, oh no, without a PhD, I cannot do anything. That's not true.
And I will just add to this. Speech language pathologist is a great job. It is not the only job outside of academia. Even if people have convinced you can only be a translator or a speech path or an academic. Just as a heads up, we know what someone has told you. They told us too.
Thank you so much for all of this advice. This is super helpful. And thank you all for being here and joining. This is an amazing conversation, and I'm definitely going to come back to it. And I've learned so much. So
yeah, I'm not a linguist, but I'm feeling inspired after this as if I was. So.
Yeah, so stay tuned. We have another panel coming up and more stuff. And if you're happen to be there's Unparsed next week, so if you want to check out the website, I think there's online tickets still available. So yeah, awesome. Stay tuned and have a great night. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thanks so
Thank
much
you,
for
Emily and
Thank you
Giulia.
so much.